Hello, everyone. It is Jennie and Laurie of Astropath. And before we dive into our video, which is going to be about Pisces season, I want to remind you all, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and do all the things. Send us messages and all of that. All of our information is below in the show notes. You can find everything you need to know to follow our work on other platforms.
hmm
Anything else you want to say just by introduction, Jenny?
No, just thank you for watching our videos. And like
Yes.
Lord said, please make comments and we will respond to them. So, yeah.
Okay. So from there, what are we talking about? We're talking about Pisces season.
hmm Yeah, it starts on February 18th at 5:06 a.m. Eastern time. So it's just around the corner here based on when we're making this video.
Yeah.
What's Pisces all about, Lori? What do you think of the Pisces?
Well, Pisces is the end of winter. It's the mutable water sign. It's the very last sign. Pisces it's also probably the most challenging one to kind of, grasp. You can think about those two fish swimming in opposite directions. You try to grab hold of them and they slither out from your fingers, and Pisces is very much like that. There is an intangibility about Pisces where it's really hard to pin it down. And if you know people who have really strong Pisces, particularly if they have, Pisces rising, you really get that sense like it's hard to really know. It's really hard to know. There is an elusiveness to
hmm
Pisces.
Yeah. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that Pisces is the last sign in the zodiac. So, in other words, it's endings. It's like everything has to kind of dissolve into that ending in order to start a new cycle. So, it's this sort of soft, muted, diffuse feeling that Pisces has. And a lot of the things that we can think about are about those endings. I mean, first of all, it comes in response to Aquarius season, which Aquarius is so cerebral and mental and really, thinking about the vision that one can construct in one's mind. Whereas Pisces just kind of drops us right into the experience. This is not about thinking about the experience. This is about being in the experience. And one of my favorite symbols for Pisces is the ocean. And it's just like that. You can think about just being like dropped in the ocean, and there's all these different layers to the ocean. There's like, the top layer where there's still light and there's all these kind of magical shimmering things happen. And then as you go deeper and deeper and deeper, there's less and less light and there's less and less understanding. And it's kind of a metaphor for our unconscious. Like there's only so much we as human beings can understand about our own unconscious. And a lot of it is just about being in it and experiencing it. And it's not that easy to just sort of then articulate and to say, oh, it's like this. Um, I always just think about, how you meditate and someone else is like, really just sitting on a cushion does anything for you. And meditation has some very profound effects, but it's very difficult to explain why and how until you do it yourself. So I think Pisces really just encourages us to drop into that inward experience. Yeah.
Yeah, Pisces is such a fascinating sign because it holds everything from, well, I always used to describe, it's funny, I haven't thought of this in a long time, but I always used to describe Pisces as a ladder.
Mm,
And the bottom rungs of that ladder, you encounter things like drugs and alcohol and addiction and all this dark stuff. You climb up that ladder, you come into the space of meditation. And well, actually, before you get to meditation, you get into music and poetry. You keep climbing that ladder, you get into meditation and all the way up into high mystical states. And what is similar in all of those is this removal from the, hard, solid reality. And along all of it is these ideas of suffering and compassion.
mm,
There's a lot of suffering involved in the idea of Pisces. And yet, there's a real purpose to suffering is the development of compassion. And so those are kind of the ways I think of it. But if you think about all those things on that ladder that I talked about, if you think about drinking too much wine or smoking too much pot or sitting on a meditation cushion or singing or reading poetry or all of these things kind of take us outside of ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
There's healthy ways and unhealthy ways, but it's all part of the mix of where Pisces can take us.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think what you just said, it does go well with that idea of the ocean, there of the layers,
Yes.
right? And that there's just these layers that are available to us through Pisces.
Yeah.
And I like that you brought in, yes, that whole, I mean, I definitely talk about Pisces a lot as compassion, and in the from the wellness perspective, like the need to develop compassion for ourselves, the need to develop compassion for others, and the truth that we all suffer and we have our moments of suffering. And a lot of times when we're suffering, when in those tough spots or things are just rough, we feel very alone
Hmm.
and we often feel very alienated. And I think part of it is you start to realize that everybody deals with that. And it becomes this, it's not that you're trying to connect through wounds, like that's sort of a different way to take it, but the idea that you start going, oh, like this is why people need kindness. I need kindness right now. How can I be kinder to myself? And then, oh, how can I be kinder to this other person who clearly has their own thing going on, who is also someone who knows about suffering? And you start really understanding that feeling of connectedness, that you start getting, oh, we're all humans living this experience. And part of this experience is going through these difficult times of suffering when things just suck. And part of coming out of that is by recognizing it as a universal state and starting to develop compassion. And compassion has an active component to it where you're really working to, it's a state that you're immersed in and then you're imagining or working towards what you can do with it. So I'm glad that you brought that in.
Yeah, suffering is such an interesting thing because people tend to, my suffering, and we don't own our suffering. We are partaking of the suffering of humanity. And once we've partaken of it enough, if we're wise enough to work with ourselves, we can use that to recognize it in others and make that connection that is so powerfully needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Otherwise, we can just go, drink ourselves under.
yes. Well, I like, that makes sense to me. I mean, I think, Pisces is well, Pisces is not about making sense, actually, is it? I mean, I think that, Pisces really speaks to those inner states and the need to, well, I guess it poses us a question. I guess that's what I wanted to say. It really poses this question, which is, when do I practice escapism? When am I running away and really not wanting to deal, which is not always bad. Sometimes you need some escapism. And then the other side of that question is, and when do I need to step back to recuperate? So it kind of
Mm.
brings in this question of, and it's a very fine line between what's healthy and what's going in the realms of now you're just avoiding and you're not living your life. And Pisces really brings that central question to us. And it's a very fine dance. It's a water sign, it's not a clear line. And a lot of it is only you know the distinction. You might be the only one who knows, oh, yeah, I'm actually really practicing escapism right now. Or, no, I need a timeout. I'm going to go and recuperate. I'm going to chill. And then I'll be back and I'll be able to be present. So it brings in that question. So ask yourself, when am I escaping? When am I recuperating, to understand Pisces? So,
There's a real idealism to Pisces also.
yeah,
Wherever in your chart you have Pisces, you're going to really encounter all of these things, these
yeah,
issues that we're talking about. The place where Pisces is in your chart is where you're going to most encounter suffering and transcendence both.
yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's
Yes. I love that you mentioned music and poetry too. Those are two very important things to work with during Pisces season. So, yeah. Um,
okay.
let's talk more about the specific season. I know you made the chart for us, so thanks for
Yeah,
bringing.
let's open up the chart and we'll take a look at. Oh dear. Here we are.
Oh,
February 18th.
yeah. Well, first of all, there's a lot of Pisces going on, isn't there, Lori?
Wow, look at it all. Yes, there
Yeah.
certainly is.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that's really the big thing here is there's a lot of activity in Pisces. But we're also preparing for big change. There's a lot of things that are in Pisces now that will be exiting Pisces, soonish.
Mhm.
I think that that's the
Yeah.
big thing that's going on here. So this particular Pisces season is really giving us an opportunity to close down the longer processes that Neptune in Pisces represents and that Saturn in Pisces
Mhm.
represents. Um, Neptune has been in Pisces since 2011, so that's a long haul, and Saturn has been in Pisces since 2023. So both of those things really have just occupied this part, and they're getting ready to leave. They're both going to go into Aries pretty soon. They will retrograde once back into Pisces, but then they'll be in Aries forevermore, starting in 2026.
Forevermore.
Yes. So, yeah, that's the first
Yeah,
thing.
and the North Node, though, that's only been in there for a very short period of time because the nodes go the opposite direction. So that's kind of a newcomer to Pisces. And Mercury, of course, is just moving through, although it is going to be stationing retrograde. That's a big piece of what's going on during this season, right, Jenny?
Yeah.
These
Yes, this
retrogrades or these stations that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely one of the keynotes for Pisces season when you're looking at these dates of February 18th through March 20th. We have Mars is stationing direct on February 23rd. It's been retrograde since December 6th.
Mm.
So that's a huge switch. And then just a week later, Venus is going to station retrograde and start working backwards from, I think it's at 9 degrees of Aries, it will be then, and it's going to start working its way backwards towards Pisces. So that's the second one. And then the third one is that Mercury is also going to station retrograde on March 15th, also at this time 10 degrees of Aries, and work its way back to Pisces. So this is the
Mm.
keynote, especially those two, Venus and Mercury, crossing that sign line, moving into Aries, and then going back into Pisces and then back again. There's a big topic and a big lesson going on in that part of life. So, hmm
Yep, back and forth, Pisces and then the other thing that we are really wanting you to think about here is that all of these planets in Pisces are ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is in Gemini. It's actually in a square aspect to these planets, but it's really, it's bringing in, well, when a planet is ruling other planets, basically the way I would want to look at this is that all of these planets in Pisces are asking Jupiter, what do we do? And Jupiter and Mercury are in each other's signs. So they are definitely, in close communication. What are we going to do with this energy? What are we going to do with these ideas of um, suffering or devotion, all of these things that we've been talking about. What are we going to do with this energy? And Jupiter's saying, talk about it, right? There's a real directive here, I think, from Jupiter,
yeah,
telling us not to get lost in the dreaminess of Pisces, not to let ourselves go down into that space of silent suffering, but to bring the attention to the connection.
yeah. Yeah, it really it's really begs this question of like, hey, you're having all these internal experiences. You've had a longer internal experience of Saturn, a much longer one with Neptune, these internal experiences, but you are being asked at this time to bring those internal experiences to the external world through your conversation. Gemini is very much about communication. You can think of it as networking and talking. I mean, there's also a listening component to Gemini too. So it's not just go out and monologue, it's go out and share your experience and then listen to the experiences of others. So there's this real interplay that Jupiter brings of, these inner experiences, this receptivity, and then, proactivity, being willing to go and then talk about it, but also continue the receptivity by listening to others and listening to where they've been in these Pisces realms.
Mhm.
So it's not easy to talk about these Pisces topics. I mean, by definition, there are things that are hard to articulate. And what Jupiter's saying is go ahead and try. Like just go for it. And that there's a lot of connection available by doing this, by sort of saying, you know what, I'm going to try to share these things, even though they might sound weird. Or maybe I've just, as you said earlier, like done some kind of psychedelic healing retreat, and now you're trying to figure out how to talk about it. And it's like trying to talk in cartoons. It's
Well,
like,
I think and that's interesting that you said that. It's kind of like trying to talk in cartoons. Well, maybe your communication is going to come through poetry or art or music. It doesn't necessarily have to, there's a blending here
yeah,
of the Gemini and the Pisces. So finding ways to express, um, yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting. We will all find different ways to do it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of a good what you just said, that blending of Pisces and Gemini. Well, that's a perfect thing to talk about when you're talking about the mutual reception between Mercury and Jupiter, is just like how to kind of talk about these things. And definitely, like, I feel like right now it's hard not to. There's a lot of suffering happening, so definitely some of this is about being in those suffering spaces and then being willing to talk and listen to others is a real therapeutic component to this. And it's not, and I like that you brought in the other types of communication, Lori, because like even just think about like talk therapy, it's helpful, but it's not the end all be all of therapy. There's a lot of other really important therapies that are not just talking. I mean, there's other experiences that are attached to some of those. So that I like that you brought that in.
Thing
Um,
I want to say too is, I mean, in some ways we could think of this as being so heavy. I mean, here we're talking about suffering, but there's also a lightness in it. With Jupiter brings expansion. It's like the expanded understanding that comes with this. Pisces is not, yes, it's about suffering, but it's not about depressive suffering.
mm,
I don't even know what words to put on that. But yeah, there's not something so heavy and immovable because think about the ocean. It's constantly moving. There's not a stuckness in it. There's constant
yes.
motion.
Yeah. No, you're right. And that's the mutability of Pisces, right? Like, and that's part of the gift of it, is not that you have to sit in it and stay the same way. It's actually that you get to swim. And you bring in that question again, are you swimming away to run away, which sometimes is appropriate, or are you swimming away to take some refuge? And sometimes it's really hard to tell whatever the difference is between those two things, or there might not be one in some instances. But that's definitely part of what it is and part of how you handle it. I do think that having the planet Saturn there for a while has conferred a heavier to it. It does. It's not the only way to look at it, but one of the ways is to say, yes, Saturn is a heavy, slow moving planet, and it does have that kind of dragging of gravity that can come with it. But that's why one of the things we want to talk about in this video is the lessons that Saturn has imparted, because it is those lessons around, well, how do you structure it then? How do you provide structure so magic can happen? I know Lori and I talked a lot about that in our Saturn video we made a couple years ago. But that's so you got to look at it both ways. Yes, Saturn brings heaviness, but it also brings structure and the possibility of stability, which is
And,
super helpful.
depending on the age of whoever's watching this video, Saturn really is different. Saturn's motion in the chart, Saturn's transiting motion around your chart is going to be very different if you're 25 or if you're 65
Yeah.
because Saturn is the planet of age, it's the planet of time. And it teaches us patience and appreciation of structure. When we're younger, we tend to, kind of resist Saturn's movements. And as we get older, we come to an understanding of how much we gain through that structuring and through that maturity that Saturn brings.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
said like an old woman.
yes. I do. Yeah, that I like that. I like the idea of the Saturn being the crone too, the crone teacher, you know. And actually, what I want to add to that conversation too is the fact that Jupiter is also a teacher, but
Hmm.
Jupiter's, you know, Saturn teaches by the stick, but Jupiter's the carrot, you know, so Jupiter kind of gives you the idea of reward. And here it's the reward of connection, the reward of conversation, the reward of connecting with other people and listening to their story they have to share. It has a different flavor as a teacher, but nonetheless, it has a little bit more of a like guru feeling to it of just like the expansiveness and it's not the same lesson of patience and boundaries that Saturn brings. It's more just the lesson around what's the positivity, what's the optimism to reach towards, what's the way to expand. Not that expanding is always great. Expanding can also be a problem, but it really brings in that other flavor. So I mean that's what we'll talk about that in the individual impacts. And um, the only thing I want to ask you about is, Laurie, what do you think about Mars stationing? Like we haven't really. I think we should talk about that because that's a key piece here. No, yeah,
Well, I'm awful glad it's going to station and start moving direct again. I'm really, really curious about what the opposition between Pluto and Mars, the final opposition. It's already opposed Pluto twice. It's going to once more, I think, in April.
yeah,
Um, yeah, wherever you have Cancer in your chart, there's something that's been really stuck and moving backwards and probably quite uncomfortable.
mm,
And yeah, keep
yeah,
an eye on how that is moving forward.
yeah, yeah. I
You know,
think
it's funny. I identify it for myself personally. I think that I my surgery happened
mm,
um, when Mars was well in its shadow. And
mm,
I think a lot of the difficulties I've had has been due to its retrograde. And I'm hoping that once it turns direct and moves forward, I'm gonna heal a lot quicker. That's my hope for Mars going direct.
yeah. Oh, that's great. I hope that for you too. And I think that your story is a summary because I have been noticing in people's lives that Mars retrograde, it has seemed to be some kind of ordeal or a series of ordeals, a series of, you know, exactly what it would represent, like backwards motion. You're like, no, I want to be doing this. And it has, I think it's represented some hurdles in people's lives. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping that when it
Yeah,
stations, it'll
certain things that you
turn
thought
well.
were moving forward, you thought this, and then all of a sudden, bang, you have to do all this. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
going backwards. And I'm very hopeful that, yeah, that my leg will finally heal.
Yes, I hope so too. Yeah. Well, anyway, we could go rattling on, but we'll cover more of these topics. We're going to do the week by week breakdown. And yeah, and the
Okay.
back. So
Let's move on then to the week by week breakdown. And I would encourage anyone who is interested to take a screenshot of that because this little calendar here for Pisces season covers everything important that's going on during this period of time.
nice. Yes. Yeah. So we start on the 18th of February with Sun enters Pisces, and it kind of comes in like a whisper. That's what I've been thinking about. Just this quiet little thing. And then you have the last quarter square moon on the 20th. And that's where we have our first we were just talking about Mercury and Jupiter being in mutual reception. Here they square each other. So there's something here. I think that last quarter moon is really saying, is tell your story.
Yeah.
You know, share your story. There's something here as the moon cycle comes to an end that it's just time to start practicing that right away. And then on through this week, Mercury trines Mars, so that I think that and the Mars station direct. I mean, look at that date, Lori, the
Yay.
23rd.
Yeah.
Like there's Mars is like, okay, I'm finally reaching my thing, and I'm gonna station direct now, and I'm gonna talk about it. It's trine Mercury. I can't wait to explain like what's going on. Like there's a real action that's happening right there. But
Yeah. Isn't that interesting how Mercury trines Mars just as it's going direct?
yeah,
Yeah, get on it.
yes, but it's also like we're in the balsamic moon at this point, or very close. And so
Yeah.
meaning we're at the end of the moon cycle, which means that we're on the mini focus of things, that this week is about those, mini closings, and there's a real
Mm,
internal vibe to this week, which is a little bit at odds with that station direct. It's a little bit anticlimactic.
mm.
So it's going to take a couple days for Mars to start,
Oh, yeah.
actually changing, moving forward. So it's a little bit like, yay, but not quite
Right.
yet.
Don't get too excited yet.
Yeah. And then Mercury starts a new cycle with Saturn on the 25th. So that's, happening, of course, in Pisces. And so that's bringing in some of those topics we're thinking about, reflecting on the long-term impacts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot in that of just, really, yeah, considering where you've been and letting go of the past. Well, this is the beginning of a cycle, but then again, Mercury's going to go retrograde, so it's going to conjunct that two more times, right?
I'm not sure if it quite reaches it, actually.
Oh, maybe it
I
doesn't.
know it's definitely going to do that with Neptune, but I'm
Yeah.
not, it's like kind of,
Maybe not. Sorry.
oh, that's all right. I haven't checked those dates either. It's fine. But
Yeah.
I don't think it quite goes back, but whatever. We'll
Okay.
know
Well,
because it'll
no.
happen again. You'll find out in Aries season.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, oh, and then so then we have a new moon, and at the new moon, the whole and oh look, it's Pisces. it's, it's
Look
like
at that.
it
That's
looks
so
like it says
correct.
princess. It's at 9 princess. The new moon is happening.
Well,
But
that's
that's
because it's sextiling Uranus. Mercury is sextiling Uranus that day. So there's a little bit of excitement,
yeah,
right? There's
that's
a
right.
little buzz in your mind at this new moon.
Yeah,
So
and I don't know. That new moon is, something like planting a seed to be open to experiences, to the inward experiences. There's something to that. But Mercury sextile Uranus, that jazzes it up. I mean, that just gives it a lot more kind of juice. Like let's, there's an excitement with that new moon, which might be helpful. Yeah.
and there on March 1st, Venus stations, I wrote direct, but it stations retrograde. Oh dear, please, people, see that. That's a mistake. It
That's right.
stations
I missed it too.
retrograde. Yeah. Oh well.
It stations. It goes going, so it's going to go backwards in Aries. So Venus in Aries is really bringing to mind like our values, our individual values, because Aries is about the individual. And Venus stationing in Aries, like that's interesting. Sort of like she's like, yeah, charge ahead, here we go. And then she says, no, you know what? Wait a minute. I'm not paying close enough attention to my values. And, you know, that has so much to say about what's going on with politics right now and what's happening with, I don't know, just like women's rights are being pressed down. And at this point, it's like, well, wait a minute. Wait, there's a review that's going to happen here, about really coming to grips with what is being said. So,
Yeah, I think that Venus retrograde, if we had time, it would be really great for us to make a video about it because there's a lot in that, in these days, in these times with what's going on politically in the world. I think Venus stationing retrograde is really important. We need to, in Aries, yeah, the fierce warrior woman needs to look at what's going on. I mean, we are
yeah.
just a few years from Me Too and all of that, and yet here we are getting squished into nothingness um, by the powers that be. So I think there's a lot to think about here, and look at where Aries is in your chart, and look at where your fierceness as a woman, if you are a woman listening to this, look at where your fierceness has to be regathered into yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, or regardless of what body you're in, the indignation of the trampling of the feminine, like that's bullshit. So it's just, I
Yeah.
mean, it just brings that right on in. So yeah, and Venus going retrograde is the whole, it intimates the whole underworld journey. So the really, having to be brave and face one's inner demons, so that you know how to face demons. It kind of brings in that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. And
I'd love to
yeah,
make a
Aries is all about courage. It's like gather that courage
yeah.
and be that warrior. Yeah.
Yeah. And so obviously we could make a whole video about that, but um, the next day we have Mercury conjuncting Neptune, so starting a new cycle. I think Mercury is going to come back in touch with Neptune for its retrograde period, as is Venus. So there's a story that's starting here, but we're not, it's going to go back and forth a bit. So that's not a complete story yet. So,
Yeah.
and then the
And
sun's Jupiter.
yeah, the sun squares Jupiter, just like Mercury did earlier, I believe. And then we get into Mercury goes into Aries. And then we're really, really ready to open our voices,
Speak our minds.
speak our
And then
minds.
it sextiles Pluto. So it's like in response
Woo,
to,
woo.
what Pluto and Aquarius represents, like these big, big changes that are happening right now. So it's definitely not just your personal thing you want to say, but you've got something to say about the culture. Um, and plus, it's the first quarter moon the next day in Gemini. So then we're highlighting Jupiter and the insistence on, yeah, you really, boy, this is a really loud week, isn't it, Lori? This is a
Yeah,
week where you it's
yeah,
time to speak up.
yeah.
And gosh, and then the sun trines Mars
And
as
then the
well.
sun trines Mars. Just after Mars has turned, Mars is going direct again. The sun trines it, giving it all that energy and heat to
Mhm.
move forward. That's a powerful day.
Yeah. Yep. That's really bringing in some real energy there. So anything that got kind of caught up in the machinations of the Mars retrograde, well, now that energy's coming free, it's coming unstuck, and it's sort of flying forwards with that trine. That is what it really is, releasing pent up energy
Yeah.
there on the 8th. So, well, it's a very active pair of weeks, isn't it? Goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then Mercury conjunct Venus. That's not a very loud tone, but it's, I think it's just really encouraging us to really pay attention, go back and pay attention to values, what's important.
Yeah, and talk about it. Again,
Yeah.
there's this big theme around having to talk. It's like talking about difficult things is
Yeah.
basically this whole season, you know. Um, and then the Saturn Sun conjunction, that's the beginning of a whole new cycle for, the Sun Saturn cycle. It's a year long. It sets up the whole situation of when Saturn's going to retrograde and when it's going to oppose the Sun and then when it's going to turn direct. So it kind of sets that whole new thing up. And Saturn's getting ready to change signs. It's going to go into Aries and
Mm.
especially before come back into Pisces. So it's setting up the just this. It's crossing the sign line. I mean, crossing the sign line from the first sign back to the last sign and back again. I mean, there's really some unfinished business that is going to become very apparent to us through that cycle. So,
And then we've got the eclipse at 23 Virgo, the same day that the sun sextiles Uranus. Isn't that interesting? It was on the new moon that Mercury sextiled Uranus. And here at this full moon eclipse, the sun sextiles Uranus. What do you think of that?
wow, that's an interesting.
That is.
A lot of energy to that. I mean, I always think of eclipses as pivot points.
Uh-huh.
Here we are is a pivot point in your Virgo house. Virgo is concerned with practicality and organization and helpfulness and, nuts and bolts, making a checklist and, checking it off and making sure everything gets done. There's a very Virgo feeling to that. So the eclipse is a pivot to do with this part of your life. And depending what important things you have there, it'll have a greater or lesser effect. But that's the big thing. And then, yeah, Sun sextile Uranus. I mean, it's the Pisces to Taurus sextile there. So that there's a lot of opportunity for something to, I think it's an opportunity to grapple with the evident changes, these shock waves that are going through all of us right now and are in the culture. And there's an opportunity to awaken more fully to something that's probably going to inform what that pivot point is in your life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something to those. Hmm.
And then the next day, Mercury stations retrograde. Oh, hey, I want to say something, Jenny. I want you to remember. I've got to say this quicker. I'll forget. When you write up the show notes, make sure you write in there that this calendar is wrong on the Venus station.
All right, Lori. Will
Okay.
do.
Got it? Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
got it.
So Mercury stations retrograde on the 15th. And, I would just say, it works so beautifully to work with Mercury retrograde by really paying attention a few days ahead. So earlier this week, really make yourself a list of all the things that you have left undone in the last couple of months. All the projects and plans that are half done sitting on a shelf somewhere, dust them off, make a list, and then don't do anything other than what's on that list for the next 3 weeks. Make sure that, project planning is done ahead of time and you're ready to clean up old stuff.
Yeah, and again, it will cross the sign line again, the air be in Aries and go back to
Yeah.
Pisces. So it really, really makes a huge statement about something unfinished that you have another opportunity to bring some kind of closure to. And we don't always get these opportunities. I mean, there's many things in life that you don't get closure. So, but there are certain things you can consciously close.
Mm-hmm.
And so take advantage of that to do that. And don't get caught up on the things that you can't get perfect closure on because that's part of life. But there are things you really can close. And I feel like we're not really trained in how to close those things down, but astrology gives us the opportunity to reflect on that. So, and then, we
I,
come to the end of the
we
sun
made
conjunction.
another mistake.
I know. It's like, I really did review this, but but anyway, no matter. The sun conjuncts Neptune, so that's the last time that um the sun will conjunct Neptune,
In
and then it
Pisces.
enters Aries the next day in Pisces. Thank you. Not last time ever, just last time in
Right.
Pisces.
Last time in
Yeah,
Pisces. So then the sun enters Aries, not Pisces.
yeah. All right. Enters Aries, and we go charging on ahead, and
Yep.
we'll do another seasonal thing for that. So, all
Okay.
right.
Okay, so are we ready to move forward and talk about the individual impacts? Here we go.
Yeah, let's talk about this. So we're going to start with Aries because that's just what we do. And so those of you with Aries rising, Pisces season always illuminates something going on in your 12th house. The 12th house is the house that is behind the scenes, things that are hidden from view. So that refers to places where you maybe want to isolate yourself from society. It's a retreat space. It's a time for quiet aloneness. It's also a place to really look at subconscious or unconscious patterns. During Pisces season, there's an opportunity to look at things in a new way. Things will stir up in a new way in those hidden behind the scenes places. So it's a very therapeutic moment in time. It's an important time for you to get enough rest, to make sure you're really taking care of yourself, because as an Aries rising person, your sensitive places are really hidden away.
Mhm.
And so whenever you have an opportunity to take care of those sensitive spots, it is very important that you do so and that you take advantage of it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the first piece. There is a longer story here, don't you think, Lori?
Yeah, one of the ways we want to think about this is that Pisces house for you, your 12th house, there's been a lot going on there for a number of years. For the past, since spring of 2023, Saturn's been moving through there. You've probably had a certain amount of kind of hidden away struggles that maybe people in your life don't even know about, but you've learned a lot about yourself. You've been sort of, yeah, really working on this deeply internal manner. And this
Yeah.
is really a wonderful period of time, this Pisces season, to think about how much you've learned about your unconscious patterns or about your understanding of your spiritual nature, either even. So there's been a lot of learning in that area over the last few years, and this is an opportunity to look at it. Think about how far you've come, what you've learned, and how you are going to bring that information into view. And with that, we're thinking about Jupiter.
Hmm.
What's going on with Jupiter, Jenny?
Well, Jupiter, as we talked about, ad nauseum, perhaps. Jupiter's in Gemini, and what Jupiter is saying here for those of you with Aries rising is it's time to talk about it. It is time to talk about those deep internal processes. It's time to express your need, perhaps for more rest, to articulate the things that you need to do to take care of yourself. So it's really just adding in the layer of, okay, you figure out what's going on with you. Make sure you're taking care of your health, you get enough rest, and then talk about it. It's like the part two is you've got to speak up because it's in your third house. Jupiter is in your third house, and it's really insisting that it's time to share. And who might you share that with?
Yeah.
What do you think, Laurie?
Well, third house, is the people in your immediate environment is
Yeah.
really bottom line. If you've got siblings or neighbors or cousins or, if you talk every day to the person at the post office, whatever it is, you want to really bring up these deep learnings that you've had in common conversations. You're not going to be standing on a podium somewhere telling people what you've learned, but you are going to be sharing it. You should be sharing it in those immediate environment type of relationships.
Nice. Yeah, those like casual encounters is what I was
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So let's move on to folks who have Taurus rising. If you have Taurus rising, this Pisces season is really shining its focus, bringing its warmth and light into your 11th house. The 11th house is, we think of it as community. It's really where we allow community to support us. It may or may not include friends, but it's the community that supports you. So, this is an area, wherever Pisces is, we tend to be really idealistic. Every year, this time of year, this area is lit up. Um, yeah, it's also it's the area where you receive love in this area. So it's a very important area. There's been a lot going on here for a period of time. What's that about, Jenny? What's the long-term piece
Mm.
here that we
Yeah.
want to look at?
Well, when you add in Saturn's flavor, Saturn has been in Pisces since early 2023. So there's been longer lessons for those of you with Taurus rising here about community. And Saturn brings in the idea of boundaries, it brings in the idea of tough lessons. So it might be that you've kind of had to tease apart, like, who is part of your community? Who is not community? There might be some confusions, like maybe some of your family members are part of your community, or maybe some that what Lori mentioned earlier, that sometimes it's your friends and sometimes it's not. But in any case, Saturn really brings in these longer lessons about the understanding of community. And because you have the capacity to be rather idealistic here, there may be some ways in which you've had to really kind of check yourself and be more realistic. Or boundaries is the keyword I've already used, but set some kind of structure around community needs. There's something in all of that. But also, that's not the only part of the story here. There's a more social part, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing that we talked a lot about in the introduction part of this video is how Jupiter is playing a really important role here. And the reason Jupiter is playing such an important role is because it rules all of these planets that are currently moving through Pisces. And Jupiter basically is, when a planet rules other planets, those planets have to answer to the planet that is ruling them. So all these Pisces planets are looking to Jupiter saying, what are we supposed to do with these lessons that we've learned? What are we supposed to do right now during Pisces season? And the answer that Jupiter is giving is very clear that we need to communicate. We need to communicate. For you with Taurus rising, it's important that you communicate what you're learning through community, what community means to you. There's something in that realm of what you're learning in that area of your life that needs to be communicated. And in communicating that, because Jupiter is currently moving through your second house, what it's really going to support is your self-esteem, your self-worth. It's going to really increase your feeling good about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it brings in, I guess one of my key words for that is values, because
Mm.
especially as a Taurus rising person, it's a very big concern around value, especially of tangible resources and things like that. So now is the time to really share what your values are. And you've
Mhm.
had so much time, because of Saturn teaching those tough lessons in the 11th house, in the Pisces house, that now is the time that you can really speak quite clearly about what your values are. But you also remember too to be receptive and to take in other people's share, learn what the values are of the other people in your community. That's also going to really help, just help you use these tools that astrology presents you with in the best possible way. That's really what you're working towards. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Gemini rising.
All right, so those of you with Gemini rising, you have Pisces in the 10th house, at least according to whole sign houses that we use. So that means that every Pisces season, you get a big spotlight, shown into your 10th house. The 10th house is the most public house. So for some of you, that's going to be your profession, where you spend a lot of your time, your vocation, your work environment. Those are things where we typically think of about showing up in a most public way. It's not always that. It also can be, simply your social reputation. If you're a stay-at-home parent, for example, like that's going to show up in this 10th house. So that's essentially what Pisces season always illuminates. And for you, having Pisces in the 10th, it means that you bring this big-hearted empathy to this very public part of life. You actually are able to be quite empathetic and quite open to other people's suffering and other people's needs. And, hopefully you're able to really develop a profound sense of compassion through this 10th house. And of course, that depends on your age. It's one thing when you're 20 figuring this out, and another thing when you're 80, you've had some times to work with it. And speaking of such long plans, what do you think about Saturn? What does Saturn have to say in this chart right now?
Well, right now, Saturn is moving through Pisces, and Saturn has been moving through Pisces since the spring of 2023. This is the last Pisces season that will occur while Saturn is in Pisces, at least for another 28 or 30 years.
Yeah.
So, for the past few years, bottom line, you've been learning a lot about what your role is in the world, what your social reputation is, what your career or vocation is or should be. There's been a lot of lessons and probably some difficulties in that area over the last few years. But you've learned a lot. Bottom line, Saturn is the authoritative teacher. It teaches us what we need to mature in whatever area it's in. So you've been really maturing a lot in regards to your career or social reputation, and this is really being highlighted right now. And this is a great opportunity for you to really look and understand and get clear about what you have learned. And then there's the piece of, okay, all of these planets in Pisces are answering to Jupiter because Jupiter rules Pisces. So we want to look at what Jupiter is asking of us, what Jupiter is telling all these Pisces planets what they need to do right now. So, what's going on with Jupiter here, Jenny?
Well, in a nutshell, Jupiter's moving through your first house. So this is all about expanding your voice. I mean, as a Gemini rising person, the way you communicate, the way you talk to other people, the way you listen to other people, these are all very important factors. And when you have Jupiter in your first house, it expands everything about your rising sign. I mean, it expands that notion. So this is a really important time. I mean, the first and the 10th houses are the two most powerful houses in the whole chart here. So this is a very important time to very simply use your voice to speak of the things that you have learned in that 10th house. Laurie and I made a video about Saturn going to Pisces a while ago. And in that video, we talked about creating a container for magic. So you have been spending your time building this container that allows the magic to happen in your career or in the most public place. And now Jupiter is just saying you've got to share, you've got to open up your voice. I can think of a person who sings
Mhm.
with this chart, and this is the time to open up your voice and sing, and really share that Pisces ethos that you have in your 10th house. I really like it.
That's
Maybe this.
beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, let's move on to folks with Cancer rising. So, if you have Cancer rising, this Pisces season, as every Pisces season, is lighting up your ninth house. The ninth house is, we think of it as our worldview. That's, in a nutshell, the ninth house is about your worldview and all the things all the experiences of your life that create your worldview. Our worldview is created through our experiences. It's not something that our parents hand us and we just hold that worldview. It is developed through our experiences. And the experiences that develop our worldview are things like travel and education and, even how we pay attention to things like politics and religion, not spirituality, but religion can be a part of that. All of these ideas and experiences that expand our understanding, cultures, other cultures. So that's what the ninth house is about, and that's where the focus is. Now, in looking at this and understanding that Saturn is playing a very big role because Saturn's been in this house for quite some time. It's getting ready to leave. So this is the sun's last time to shine on this area while Saturn is traveling through there. So what's Saturn's story here, Jenny?
Yeah, it's pretty cool to think of it that way because what Saturn has done is, as you've said, it's imparted these lessons. And so it's really a moment of, taking all those life experiences and, letting them develop into a life philosophy. I mean, Saturn speaks to how you hold authority in your life, how you hold your own inner authority. So with it preparing to leave, this is the moment to really reflect on what is that authority that you've developed through your experiences. What is your life philosophy, especially in the last couple years that have really that has shifted and changed, and what lessons have you learned? How have you grown up in the way of your worldview? I mean, that there's a real maturity that hopefully is coming up for you at this time. So I think that's what Saturn really brings. It's the ninth house is part of your self-expression, so it's really the philosophy that you develop in response to all those experiences. So I think it's yeah, hopefully a fruitful time. The ninth house is a great house. It's a very positive, optimistic house. So, but there is an interaction with Jupiter here too. So we want to take that one, Lori?
Sure. And the reason we're looking to Jupiter, in case you didn't watch the preliminary part of our conversation, the reason we're bringing Jupiter into the conversation is because Jupiter rules all those planets in Pisces. Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. And so we're looking to Jupiter because all of these planets that are moving through Pisces are looking to Jupiter and asking Jupiter, okay, what do we do with all this sort of fuzziness of Pisces, all of this suffering and illumination of Pisces? What do we do with all this learning here in this ninth house? Jupiter is traveling through Gemini. So it's traveling through your 12th house, expanding your understanding of your own internal processes. There's some link here where what Jupiter is requiring us to do is to talk about what our learning has been, what our maturing has been in terms of our worldview. Now, I'm getting a little stumped here, Jenny. Who are we talking to when Jupiter's going through the 12th house?
Well, I think it's interesting with this one because I do kind of just think this is the ninth and the 12th houses are both concerned with learning and teaching in their own ways. So I just feel like it's time to share the wisdom that you've been gaining. And even if you feel sort of like, wait, I'm not done yet, or you aren't sure about that, it doesn't matter. It's now's the time. It's the time to just go ahead and start really turning those life experiences that you're gaining in the ninth house into the way that you're sharing with others. I mean, there's a teaching component here for sure. I mean, it's like having the two teacher planets in these two sort of teachy type houses. So there's something about that. And I think in the 12th house, there's a need to let go. This isn't about your ego. This isn't about, you. This is more just you as a channel of how your life experience has come through and inform, because it is Gemini, inform other people as to what's, as to this knowledge. And don't forget, like I think it's so important that we need to listen too. Like, there's a receptivity also. So it's also going out and listening to the experiences of whoever you're interacting with in these like teacher spaces. As so the teacher and the student really, it just flip-flops, right? So I think that's a lot of what it brings up for me.
It's really interesting. As you were saying that, I'm really glad you used the word channel because there's
Hmm.
something about with that Jupiter in the 12th house, there's something in it that feels like you just have to get out of the way and be a
Yeah.
channel with that information.
Yeah, like it's not the ego, which Jupiter can bring an ego sometimes, right?
Right,
But it's not,
right.
you don't own the experience. It's just what you have experienced,
And one of the
something like
things,
that.
because I know this one is you, and I was thinking about Jupiter in that 12th house, I was thinking about you sitting alone, toiling away, writing in that 12th house.
Hmm.
Anyway, there you have it.
Hmm.
Are we ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to folks who have Leo rising.
All right. So if you have Leo rising, Pisces season always shines a light into your eighth house. The eighth house is, one of the most mysterious, secretive houses. This is the house that has to do with skeletons in the closet. This is the house that has to do with other people's attitudes about money and sex and like all these kind of quote unquote taboo topics, or things that we've tried to say are taboo in our society. So those of you with Leo rising, you have a window into that part of life. You have this spiritual window that opens up into other people's stuff, other people's baggage. And it also means that you really have a big capacity for compassion in this area, that you can really see other people's stuff and you can choose when to retreat from it and step back if you're working with that Pisces energy well. And you can also have an enormous amount of compassion and a softer ability, an ability for forgiveness, really, in this area of life. So that's quite the skill set that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a Leo type personality that the rising sign suggests. But it is a tool in the toolbox for you. So that's what Pisces season always brings up. But this particular Pisces season is special because it has to do with the ending of a longer process. The planet Saturn has been in that eighth house since 2023, and it really speaks to a longer process. Which, what do you think that process might be about, Laurie, if it's happening in the eighth house?
Well, I always think about the video you and I made about Saturn moving into Pisces in early 2023 and how, you can think about wherever Pisces is as a place where we are very idealistic and very kind of dreamy and maybe a little out of touch.
Yeah.
And Saturn, we talked about Saturn moving into Pisces as Saturn's job was to build a structure within which that idealism and just the dream of Pisces can expand. And so since 2023, those of you with Leo rising have been doing just that in that area of how to navigate other people's issues, how to learn. You have learned a lot, I would expect that those of you with Leo rising have worked hard, faced obstacles, and learned a lot about how to set boundaries, how to navigate these deep, profound issues that you encounter in other people. And yeah, this Pisces season is giving you this great opportunity to look at this and think about how much you've learned. Think about what you've learned in terms of how to set boundaries, all of those things. What have you learned? And then the other thing that we've brought into the conversation here is Jupiter's role. And the reason Jupiter has a role to play, a big role to play in this Pisces season, is that there's a bunch of planets there in Pisces, and they are all answering to Jupiter because Jupiter rules Pisces. So, what's Jupiter bringing to the table and to the conversation, Jenny?
Jupiter, it's pretty simple, this one, I feel like. It's like all that thing that you've learned, everything Laurie just mentioned, everything Pisces represents about the eighth house and other people's stuff and all those things. It's time to share what you've learned. And who you're going to share that with? Your community. It's time to step into that role. You've got Jupiter is in your 11th house of community, and it's in Gemini, which is all about talking and listening and communicating and networking with people. So it's time to bring your special area of expertise, which has to do with those boundaries, and bring that to your community and bring that into. I think of it as like a healing light. It's you're thinking about with Pisces in the eighth house. It's about healing, helping other people heal their own very difficult, traumatic issues and relationships. It's about helping people heal relationships. So it's time in a nutshell to really bring that information to the larger populace, to work with other, I would think, like professionals and colleagues and other people in the community who understand that work as well, and start making it bigger. I think
Mm.
that's essentially what's going on here. And so that also means, listening to what other people in your community have to say and working together to build that social resource that the 11th house represents.
It's
So,
awesome.
yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on then to folks who have Virgo rising. If you have Virgo rising, this Pisces season, as every Pisces season does, it highlights the area of your seventh house. And the seventh house is one of the most simple to understand. It is relationship. The capital R relationships in our lives are seventh house issues. I think of it as contractual relationships. A quick little romantic partner is not a seventh house issue, that's a fifth house issue. But if you're married or have some sort of a committed partnership, of any sort, a business partner, a romantic partner, those are your seventh house relationships. So that's where there's a real bright light being shown right now. That's where the focus is. But this is not like every Pisces season of your life. This is a particular one where we have had Saturn moving through Pisces since 2023. This is the last time the sun will share space with Saturn while it's in Pisces. So this is sort of a wrap up of a longer term process. And I'm going to let Jenny talk about the longer term process.
Yeah, I mean, having Saturn in your seventh house for a while, I mean, that's quite a statement. It's been there, as Laurie said, since early 2023. And, it's really making a statement about a lot of different lessons that are being learned around partnership. And the seventh house is interesting because it's not just, the external partners, all those people out there. It's who you show up as a partner as well. And so it's really having Saturn in the seventh house really has a lot to say about having to learn more about, let's say, maturity and accountability in relationships. And boy, those are lessons all of us need reminders on here and there, right? Like it
Yeah.
really brings in, it brings that in, and it brings in the longer process of that. And it's not that when Saturn leaves that you're just like done with those lessons and you're good and you've checked the box. It's just that you've overcome let's say, a mountain climb in the middle of the book of your life. You've done a mountain climb to do with your relationships, and that there's a lot of fruitful lessons that have come about from that. And when it does move into the Aries and into your eighth house, you're kind of in this place where you've really worked with those lessons around stability and accountability, and you're coming into it in a stronger place because the eighth house is trickier than the seventh house.
Mhm.
So that's what Saturn's kind of bringing to the table for you. It's really letting you see how far you have come since
Mhm.
2023 and how you handle these partnerships. Yeah, and it does relate to your professional life as well because we have brought Jupiter into this conversation. Jupiter is the planet that all those Pisces planets are looking at Jupiter going, "Hey, how do we do this?" Because Jupiter rules Pisces. So that kind of sets up the situation when those planets look to Jupiter to be like, "Hey, how do we do this thing? How do we gauge where we're at? How do we show we've learned lessons in our partnerships?" And Lori, what do you think? How do you do
Well,
that?
The answer is really, really clear. With Jupiter moving through your 10th house, if you have Virgo rising, this is a time where you have to bring what you have learned in partnership in some way, bring that into your career, into your social reputation. You have to be talking about what you've learned. It's not something that you have been learning just for yourself. You are learning this to bring this conversation into a public realm.
Hmm.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I was like, this sounds like somebody should be like writing a draft for a book about relationships or something. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking of.
I wasn't even thinking about that until all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's exactly what I'm doing right now anyway, is writing that book.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's fascinating. Fascinating.
yeah, that's cool. That
Okay.
totally makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense, doesn't it?
We're done, Virgo.
Okay, we're moving on now to Libra rising.
All right, Libra rising. Let's see. Well, those of you with Libra rising, you have Pisces on the sixth house cusp, at least according to whole sign houses that Laurie and I use, which means that every Pisces season brings a real highlight to your lifestyle, your routines, your habits, all the things that kind of make up the fabric of your daily life. So think about, your sleeping patterns, your how you eat, like your nutrition, how you exercise, who you exercise with,
Or
that
not.
I know, right. Um, and then think other things like what other practices you have, like what other habits help you. Do you meditate? Are you somebody who likes to get outside every day and connect with nature? And I would think that those of you with Pisces in the sixth house, that would be a very, very good thing to get outside and connect with water and nature on a regular basis for sure, because you have this mystical magical sign of Pisces in your house of routines. Right? So, I mean, you need some magic in your daily life. Like, you are
Mm.
somebody who will really benefit from that little touch of the mysterious, the magical, the spice of life. Like, you need a little bit of that on the regular. And so this Pisces season well, every Pisces season really brings that into focus. And then this Pisces season in particular really begs a question about what things you have learned recently that about what you need to structure for your health and your habits, because the sixth house also does have to do with especially your physical health, and it's all those habits and how they lead up to your actual health, like the health of your body, and whether or not you need to make adjustments to support that health. I mean, that's ultimately what it brings. So Pisces here, there's a real sensitivity, there's a need to be really in tune, and there's a need for magic. And what lessons does Saturn bring here, Lori, when you think about Saturn being in Pisces?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this is clearly the area where the focus is here for this Pisces season. And we've brought in the conversation with Saturn also because this is, Saturn has been moving through this area of your life since early 2023. So you have been learning a lot about yourself through lessons that have come through your body or through your routines in some way, and some of those lessons may not have been real easy, but you've really matured in your understanding of how to manage your lifestyle. That's been a big learning probably over the last few years. And so you want to think about that. This is the last time the sun will be moving through this area while Saturn is still in here. So it really offers an opportunity to look at it and think about what you've learned and really, yeah, appreciate how far you've come, what you've learned. And then the other thing that we want you to think about is how Jupiter plays in. Because Jupiter rules Pisces, we want to look at where, the planets in Pisces are looking to Jupiter saying, what do I do with all of this? What do I do right now in this Pisces season, how do I manage? What do I do with what I've learned here? And Jupiter is who we're going to go to answer that question. So, what's Jupiter got to say here, Jenny?
Well, Jupiter is in Gemini. It's moving through your ninth house, and it's in charge of all those Pisces planets. It's like all those Pisces planets are going, hey, what do I do with this? What do I do with my new learning? What do I do with my new structure around my routines and so on? And Jupiter is really saying, you got to talk about it. You've got to share what you've learned. And because it's in your ninth house, it means that you've taken all those routines and you've kind of solidified them into part of your sense of self. And it's time to allow that incorporation of those routines into your sense of self to inform your worldview, to inform your perspective. And, the ninth house really is the house of teachers, so it's really saying, share what you've learned, illuminate other people with how this has impacted you, and kind of occupy a teacher space in the interest of helping other people learn about this part of themselves, or learn, something maybe they need to learn about their health, or some kind of wisdom that you uniquely have to offer at this time. So I think it really makes a big statement about that. And I can't help but note that the truth of anytime you are a teacher, you are intrinsically also a student, because you never learn more than what you learn from your students as a teacher. I mean, you really, really learn from those students. So it really is this wonderful opportunity to kind of create more balance as a Libra rising person, and to take on that lesson and figure out how to bring that kind of balance to your life in a new way. So that's what I think. I don't know.
We teach best what we most need to learn.
Yes.
It's true.
Or we teach worse what we have to learn, then we figure it out and we get better at it.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to folks who have Scorpio rising. So, for those of you with Scorpio rising, this Pisces season is shining its big bright light right there in your fifth house. The fifth house is really, it's the funnest house, I'd say. It's really it's the house that speaks to how we give of ourselves most efficiently, most whatever. It's how we give of ourselves. It's how we give love to others, whether it be our children, love affairs. It's how we give of ourselves to our creative projects, to it also involves things like risks and playfulness. So there's a lot of joyfulness in this area. And for folks with Scorpio rising, they've got Pisces in this area. So there's kind of a magic quality to the ability to give love. So that's where the focus is at this time. Now, we want to take into consideration that the sun going through Pisces isn't the only thing going on in Pisces right now. There's a lot going on there, but the one thing that we want to really think about is Saturn has been moving through this area, through Pisces, since early 2023. And this period of time of this Pisces season is really the last time the sun will go through here while Saturn is here. So it's giving us an opportunity to think about what that process has been. So, this longer term story of Saturn, what's that been about, Jenny?
Well, it's interesting because Saturn can be a pretty tough teacher. I mean, it really sort of teaches by, you there's a lot of need for patience. There's a lot of need to kind of bump up against like the uh, various limitations, really. So there's been some lessons around that in your fifth house. So there's been some lessons, in other words, of how you give of yourself or how you give love. And those lessons, they could definitely come through children. That is one thing in the fifth house that you might be thinking of. But so those really difficult, challenging things that we must learn could come through children. It could be that you used to take too many risks and now you need to step back from that, or maybe you don't take enough risk and you're risk averse. And so it plays around with those principles. So whoever you are with Scorpio rising, you know what I'm talking about because you've been through something since Saturn has been there in 2023. There's some shift in the way you give of yourself. There's a new set of boundaries. There's a, maybe there's a deeper sense of compassion because you've experienced some suffering of your own here. So in any case, those are some of the topics that Saturn might bring. It's not an easy teacher, but it is a very fruitful one. It is a very helpful one. We all have to go through those lessons in order to mature. So that's where Saturn may have maybe ran you over the coals a little bit. But also there's another player here. And the other player that Laurie and I are talking about here is Jupiter. Jupiter is in Gemini. That means it's been in your eighth house. But the key takeaway is that all those Pisces planets, including Saturn and the Sun and so on, they're all looking towards Jupiter and saying, all right, I've done this thing. I've been through this ordeal. I've learned all these lessons. Like, well, now what? What do I need to do? And what do you think that is, Laurie? What's the lesson here of Jupiter now?
Well, I think Jupiter is just, Jupiter in Gemini. And Jupiter just wants to expand things. And in Gemini, it wants to expand our voice. And I think that, all of the learning that has happened in that fifth house, whether it be through um, whatever it is, whether it be through your relationships with children or your own creativity, there have been those pieces, those hard lessons that you've learned around how you give of yourself. So, what you've learned in that realm, Jupiter is asking you to bring that information, to open your voice about it, to speak about it, to use that learning to understand how to eighth house, navigate other people. So it's really, these deep conversations with other people in your life that you can share what you've learned. And I think that's what Jupiter is speaking of here for folks with Scorpio rising.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good, this one seems pretty clear to me. It's like those lessons you've learned perhaps through children, they are going to inform you in the ways you handle all other difficult issues as other people. So that's pretty cool. Like you've probably learned a lot about how to have really good conversations that are challenging in
Yeah,
this time.
yeah,
So yeah,
definitely,
yeah, cool.
definitely. Bigger conversations about important issues. Okay, we're going to
That's
move on to folks with Sagittarius rising.
All right, so those of you with Sagittarius rising, Pisces season always really shines a spotlight into your fourth house of home and family. So this time of year, every year is just shining some kind of light on whatever's going on in your home life. So the fourth house has to do with your physical house that you live in or home that you live in. It has to do with the family members who also live there. And on a level, I guess kind of a deeper level, it can also refer to your upbringing, your own childhood, your own family that you were raised in. So there's a lot here in the fourth house. It's a potent house. It's the most private house in the whole situation here. So there's a lot of depth here. And boy, with Pisces in the fourth house, there's really a lot of depth here. This speaks to the idea of there's maybe some sort of lineage. There's some kind of suffering that has come along with that, or some profound mystical understanding that's come along with lineage. So all those Pisces topics that we mentioned in the beginning of this video are all things that very much could be part of your home life and your lineage. So there's a real sensitivity here with Pisces in the fourth house. I mean, it really implies that the very foundation of your personality is based on this sensitivity and perhaps the capacity for compassion. So Pisces season always brings those issues up. It always brings, sensitivity, home life up. But there's also been a longer process here that you're likely aware of because the planet Saturn has been in your fourth house since 2023. And what kinds of things does Saturn bring to the fourth house, do you think, Lori?
Well, since 2023, you have probably there's been a lot of development, a lot of changes, a lot of effort that you've had to expend around your home or family or learning. Maybe you've learned a lot about your ancestry or you've, struggled with your family or moved across the country or whatever. That area of home and family has been a place of deep and probably challenging learning over this period of time. So yeah, this is the last time the sun will be in Pisces while Saturn is still there. So it really gives us an opportunity to look and understand what we've learned in this area. What have you learned? And yeah, you want to really think about that you've probably learned a lot of patience, hopefully. So you want to take that learning and um, really understand what it is. And then the other piece that we've been talking about is how Jupiter plays an important role in this season as well. And the reason Jupiter plays such an important role is because it rules Pisces. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. It's because it rules Pisces. So we want to look, all the Pisces planets are looking to Jupiter, asking, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with what is it we need to do? What is it we need to pay attention to during this Pisces season? And Jupiter is moving through Gemini. So, Jennie, what is Jupiter saying? What's Jupiter telling us we need to do if we have Sagittarius rising?
Uh, this one seems fairly straightforward. It's saying whatever you're learning in your home life, it's time to really open up the lines of communication with your partner. It's time to open up the dialogue. So, speak what you've learned, share your understanding, explain as best as you can, articulate those deep underpinnings of Pisces, like the flow of the ocean. So, not the easiest thing to articulate, but it's time to really open up the channel of communication. And in return, be all ears for your partner, like be available for deep listening, listen to what they have to say, ask them questions, really be fully present to whatever the conversation is. And then when you speak in return, speak from a place of compassion, speak from the heart, and be clear about what it is that you want to say and get across. It really comes down to that. And I imagine that that's going to impact not just your main partnership, but all one-on-one conversations that you're part of. The lessons around compassion essentially infuse your whole identity and brings allows you to bring that to each and every conversation you have in a one-on-one capacity. So that's powerful.
It is. That really is. Okay, we're going to move on then to folks who have Capricorn rising. If you have Capricorn rising, this Pisces season, as every Pisces season does, brings the attention to your third house. Now, the third house is really about communication. We think of it as communication, but then there's the people that inhabit the third house as well, which is siblings, neighbors, people that we don't really choose. Yeah, I think of the third house very much as the people that are part of our lives that we were not, that we didn't choose. So it's also our neighborhood, our immediate environment, the people in our immediate environment. You can look at it that way. So that's where the attention is during this Pisces season. Now, each season is a month long, but this time there's a long term storyline that we want to think about as we're talking about Pisces season, because this is the last time that the sun in Pisces is sharing Pisces with Saturn. Saturn has been moving through Pisces since early 2023. So we want to think about what is the sun encouraging? What is it bringing to the table to enhance or remind us of the fact that Saturn is still in here? So, what's Saturn's story, Jennie?
I mean, Saturn definitely suggests there's been a lot of learning, around how you communicate. There might be learning around boundaries about when and how you communicate with people. There might be learning around, as you've said, like your neighborhood. I mean, neighborly relationships can be pretty challenging. And
Mhm.
with Pisces on the third house, it suggests that you have a big capacity to be empathetic towards other people. It also might suggest a struggle with confusion about what you want to say and how do you want to say it. It also speaks to the possibility of perhaps some susceptibility to other people's nonsense, quite honestly.
Mhm.
So those could all be things that really have come to light in this time period of Saturn being there, like some kind of difficulty and confusion around the way you communicate in either direction, the way you receive information. Um, but ultimately, the best scenario here is that you've really learned how to be very compassionate towards your siblings and your neighbors and really take that sort of forgiving and broad understanding and incorporated it into your even your most mundane conversations. So that's what Saturn really brings in. So take that longer view and see what comes to mind for you. And then the last piece that we've been talking about is that Jupiter is the planet that rules Pisces. So that means that all those planets that are in Pisces right now are kind of looking over at Jupiter and saying, hey, all right, well, I've learned these lessons and I'm doing these compassion things and, so on and so forth. What am I supposed to do with it? And Jupiter really makes a clear pathway. And what do you think of that pathway for Jupiter at
I
this
thought of
point?
something very sarcastic, but I'll resist saying.
Go ahead.
No, I think, Jupiter is asking, what I was going to say is Jupiter's asking you to meditate on your difficult relationships with your siblings. Um, but I think, really it's asking that you pay attention to what you have learned around your communication skills, what you have learned through these interactions with people in your immediate environment. Take what you've learned there and bring the conversation about it. Open up your voice and use your voice on a really kind of routine manner. Like it needs to be part of the every. It's sort of like there's some stories that you were not expressing, and now you need to like bring them into the everyday conversation. Does that
Right.
make sense in how you're thinking about it, Jenny?
Yeah, yeah, definitely that transition from the third to the sixth house is like, yeah, take those quick mundane lessons and then make them into part of how you run your life, on the
Right,
day, like continue to use those lessons. So, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
right,
a bit like
right.
that. Mhm.
That's interesting. Okay, is that everything for Capricorn?
I think so.
All right, we're going to move on then to folks who have Aquarius rising.
Okay, so those of you with Aquarius rising, you have Pisces on the second house cusp. Again, that's according to the house system that Laurie and I use. The second house here really brings in money. It brings in your values, your resources. It brings in your self-esteem, how you think of yourself, how you value yourself are important topics. And those of you with Aquarius rising and having Pisces here, it's so important that you give yourself compassion, that you're compassionate towards yourself. It'd be very easy here to feel confused about who you are as an individual or to feel like there's some suffering here, maybe stemming from really not recognizing your worth, in your relationships and as you go about your life. So that's what Pisces season always kind of shines a light on. It gives you a little gauge, like, how am I doing here? Like, how am I doing with my money? How am I doing with the way I value myself? Am I being compassionate enough? Am I withdrawing from the world in the way I need to develop more self-compassion? It really brings in all of those questions. But what's interesting about this particular Pisces season is it's really bringing a more of a closure feeling to some of those processes. And the reason for that is because the planet Saturn has been going through Pisces in your second house since 2023. So that brings in these more challenging lessons. And what do you think some of those lessons might be about, Lori, in the second house?
Money, self-worth. Yeah, over these last few years, since early 2023, when Saturn moved into that house, you really have had to take responsibility for your own resources, your own money, your own self-worth in a new way. And Saturn is considered the authoritative teacher. It teaches us lessons whether we like them or not. It's Saturn teaches us hard lessons and leaves us with a lot more responsibility and a lot more comfortable in that area. So you've probably learned a ton about who knows about how you make money, how you spend money, how you understand money, and there's that very close connection between money and self-worth. So, really learning to understand how those two are connected. So that's what you've been really working on learning for a few years now. Um, so the other thing that we want to bring in here is Jupiter. And the reason we're bringing Jupiter into this conversation is because Jupiter rules Pisces. So all the planets that are in Pisces right now are looking to Jupiter and saying, okay, what do we do with all of this new understanding? What do we do with what we've learned around money and resources? And what's Jupiter telling? What's Jupiter saying, Jenny?
Well, Jupiter here is in your fifth house, which is it's in Gemini, and the fifth house that's a lovely house. It really is the house of creativity. It's the house of fun and pleasure. It's often the place where you might look to understand how people like to recreate and enjoy themselves. And with Jupiter here, that's really making those topics big. It is really time to um, enjoy yourself, to pursue what that is. And so it's a time to speak about it. I mean, Jupiter's really kind of highlighting this idea that you need to share the lessons that you've learned, and the Pisces lessons here, the lessons around spirituality and the lessons around compassion and suffering and all of those topics. It's time to fold all those lessons into your creative process. It's
Mm.
time to kind of mix them into the batter and, make an amazing cake. It's time to in some way express that in a uniquely creative way. And as an Aquarius rising person too, like you have a unique message. You are a change maker. You're here to bring something different to the table. And the Jupiter is saying, all right, well, now's your moment. Now's your time to step up and impart that wisdom, and incorporate what you've learned from other people into that. So I really like that. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that really is.
Hmm.
Okay, I think that clears up Aquarius. So we're going to move on to folks who have Pisces rising. If you've got Pisces rising, Pisces season is your season. It's right in your first house. The attention is on you, on your self-expression, on how you express your personality, how you show up in the world. That's where the focus is at this time. Now, there's a much bigger story going on than one would expect if we just look at the sun moving through there, because we've had Saturn moving through Pisces since early 2023. So that brings in a whole nother line of the story that we really need to be paying attention to. So, do you want to talk about
Yeah,
what
sure.
Saturn's role is here?
Yeah, Saturn is in Pisces. It's been there since 2023. And having Saturn go through your first house, that's a big deal.
Hmm.
That makes a really big statement about how you carry yourself, how you work with your own inner authority, your ability to set boundaries with other people and just really exude that gravitas Saturn's really giving an opportunity for you to do that. These are not necessarily easy lessons. Those are hard things to do. They really speak to growing pains, the need to be mature, be patient, to accept losses and failures and keep going. And in Pisces, I think that those are going to be some of the lessons, or is to not let those difficult experiences like drag you down, but to pick yourself up, be kind to yourself, dust yourself off, and carry on. I think there's a big lesson about that in the last 2 years. So think about all the things that you have been through in the last 2 years that have an impact on the way you move through the world with authority. I mean, that's essentially it. The first house is the most powerful house in the chart, so this is a big deal for you. It also is offset or is impacted by the journey that Jupiter has been on. You know, Jupiter is in Gemini. Jupiter rules all the Pisces planets. In other words, all those Pisces planets in your first house are kind of looking over at Jupiter and saying, hey, you know, like I've learned these things and I'm doing these different things, but what do I need to do now?
Mhm.
And what is that, Lori? What do you think? What's
Well,
the message here?
Jupiter's been in Gemini for, I don't know, 9 months, something like that. It's been there for quite a while and it's been moving through your fourth house. And Jupiter's job is to expand things. Being in Gemini, it's expanding our ability to speak up, it's expanding our intellectual curiosity. But in this particular point in time, during this Pisces season, what Jupiter is telling all these Pisces planets is to really go deep in understanding the changes that have happened in the personality itself and to bring that understanding to the family. There are family members, I would say, that there's family members that need to know what you're going through and that will be really supported. And yeah, there's a connection between you and whether it's your family of origin or the family and the home you live in, one or the other, there's a way that you really need to open up and express where you are and the changes that you've been through.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
All right, I think we've come to a close.
Yeah, I think that this has covered all the bases. So hopefully you've learned a lot from, or learned something from this.
Awesome. This was fun. I enjoyed doing this with you, Jenny. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.